Why does getting to the airport have to be such a dilemma? The driving, parking, finagling a ride. Well, if you take Uber, it doesn't. It's easy. Just install the Uber app. Enter your destination, confirm your location, and within minutes, a car will pick you up. Whether you're catching the red eye or taking off at the crack of dawn, you can request a ride 24/7. So avoid the hassle. Install the Uber app now and take your first ride today. Uber, the better way to get there.
There's some dangerous, large carnivore out there.
And I saw that bird pick a young deer off the road and fly away.
And it was just about getting dark, and we started panicking, running down this ridge, not really having any clue what was throwing rocks in our vicinity, good-sized rocks. And I stopped long enough to get a 357 out of my backpack and looked back, and that's when I saw it. I saw one.
For a week, the town of Defiance was being harassed by a werewolf, and it's actually attacked two railroad workers, killed livestock.
Hey, welcome everybody to Monster X Radio. Shane Corson here, and Monster X Radio is, of course, brought to you by Sasquatch Coffee. Have you tried it yet? Got a special show for you guys this evening. Got a friend of mine going to join us here, and a fellow Olympic Project member, and a very intelligent guy that's full of ideas and very adventurous, and has had, some very possibly, well, he knows for a fact, Sasquatch activity happened to him. And we've had him on the show in the past, but it's been quite a while. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring Nathaniel York Bronis on the show, and we're gonna chat tonight about a variety of things. But Nathaniel, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Great. Hey, thanks, man. Thank you. Thanks for joining Monster X Radio here, and looking forward to speaking with you.
Oh, of course. Anytime.
Yeah. It was funny. You gave me a call the other day. I hadn't heard from you in a while, and you gave me a call the other day, and we started chatting, and just about life and stuff. And we got into the usual subject of Sasquatch, and it was just such a enlightening, interesting conversation. You had a lot of insight, a lot of ideas, and you were looking at adding some of the natural stuff out there to the known stuff to our conversation, and comparing it to some of the Sasquatch finds and stuff. And I just thought it was very interesting, and it was a great conversation. I was like, I got to get Nathaniel back on the show. I know I appreciate you, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners will appreciate you as well.
Well, yeah, thanks.
So, Nathaniel, it's been a little while since you've been on the show, and I know you've been really busy working. You got a lot going on in your life, but for Monster X has grown exponentially. It's crazy, and so for a lot of our new viewers that maybe have not listened to some of the archived shows, can you just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and where you're from, your background, and then we'll get into your original Sasquatch experience.
Oh, sure. Well, I was born in Michigan, middle of nowhere, small town. Didn't really see or do a whole lot. I just grew up in the country, around out deer hunting and camping, doing a lot of just outdoor stuff. That's pretty much what I was into. Bushcraft and just anything to do with outside was kind of something I spent time doing. My first experience happened July 24th, 2009, so right around midsummer. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon. I was out actually scouting for my first year possible deer hunting. I saw a TV show about it, wanted to give it a whirl and see what would happen. So I went out and I started scouting for deer out off the backside of my grandmother's property and our property, and onto our neighbor's property. He was cool if I just scouted around to figure out where stuff was bedding down or moving, or where they were, the bachelor groups of young bucks were holding up during the later part of the season. I was going to plot that all out. So I'd started in the summertime just kind of mapping out where all the does were bedding down, spending a lot of time and playing the wind. I was out and I covered already my grandmother's field and part of ours, and I was cutting back around some of the rock piles because I noticed that the deer like to bed up around these rock pile areas for whatever reason, possibly lick minerals off them or something of that matter. I started walking the quad trail because it was the quietest way. You couldn't make a whole lot of noise because it was mowed most of the time, or it was so run out by trucks and quads that it was exposed soil, so you didn't make any noise walking on it. I started walking toward the east side, the east side, along the popple, and I was cutting to the left, kind of following the wind of it all, because it bends in and out, the forest line does, on the backside of this property. And I got kind of just around the first bend, and I could see a darker silhouette kind of patching in and out between some of the young popple. That young popple that comes up after a clear cut has been done. After a few years, it pops up real quick, and lean and tall. Yeah. So I could see a dark silhouette moving through, and it didn't look particularly fast or anything at the moment from that distance. And I just kind of assumed it must have been the neighbor guy. He was out plotting for stands for the fall, I don't know, for deer hunting. And so I thought I was just going to walk up and ask him if he saw any deer or anything. And I started following the trail just quietly because I'm not going to yell that far off and spook stuff up. The whole point of me being out there is just to see what was bedded down. So I'm just walking and looking in that direction, looking at the ground, looking around for deer, seeing if he's spooking up anything, if I'm spooking up anything. Get up to right around 180 feet and just starts looking kind of odd to be to the neighbor, but still I'm just far enough away in the tree line that it's hard to tell exactly what I was looking at. Got up to 150 feet, because I'm just walking and looking at the same time. And there's something odd, very odd, all at that point, about the way he looked, the movement that he was exhibiting, going through the young trees. It was just very odd. And then I saw parts of sun hitting what I later would find to be hair, and it just didn't look like clothing. Finally got up to right around 120 feet, and we're kind of converging to the same point because I'm heading east, and this thing is coming in from the north and kind of heading south. So we're kind of converging on each other. I'm at about 120 feet. I'm dead stopped at this point because I know there's something really weird. Disproportionately, there's something weird going on. Angles of the body were in different places than they should have been. For instance, he wasn't the most fit guy. He liked his beer, and his food. So he wasn't exactly the leanest guy out there, but whoever or whatever this thing was, long-limbed, very muscular in posture and body structure. Finally, I'm watching it, and I just watched it kind of push back some of this popple, and it just with one arm kind of swept it back into the left of its left arm. And that's when I knew right away that just wasn't the neighbor guy. very, yeah, just not the neighbor guy. We'll go with that.
Right.
And I'm watching it go through the popple, and it finally comes out and hits, it clears the whole tree line. And it just stepped right out into the sun, right in front of me. It was about 4:30, so the sun's coming in from behind me pretty much to the west and over top of my head and hitting towards it. So I don't know if that's why it didn't notice me sooner, as it was kind of sun-blinded or something. But it stepped out into the path right at the quad trail. Well, we're right in front of the quad trail, I should say. Like, it came out, kind of stopped. It looked down, like at the trail, and then it looked up straight in front of it, straight to the south, down at the trail again. And it did this about 4 times. And it then, like, in between doing that, it finally, like at the 3rd or 4th time, stopped and must have seen me at the corner of its eye as like a silhouette against the sun or something, because I don't know, I didn't move at that point. I wasn't moving. I was perfectly frozen. I was wearing a camo shirt, and I'll never forget, it's like 3 sizes too big. I'm just standing there. And it finally, like, double-taked. Like, the head kind of yanked a little bit in my direction and yanked back left and then yanked all the way back around. And when it turned its head all the way, it turned at the waist and the shoulders, and then rotated its foot out, its left foot out, and kind of sidestepped a little bit. Just a little bit, just on an angle, like about maybe 15 degrees. And that's when I could really see in its right arm, there was a dead fawn. The meat, you could tell, was all stripped of it. Back legs, hindquarters, even the meat between the spinal column and discs. Hide was rolled up like a sleeping bag, like just like how you roll up a sleeping bag, all the way up to, from the base of the tail, all the way up to the neck, the base of the neck. The front shoulders still had meat on them, and the neck obviously did, because the hide was still coating over the musculature and bones there. But it looked like basically the whole hindquarters all the way up to behind the shoulder blades had been stripped of meat, and no organs or anything. At that point, it locked eyes with me, and I remember, I'll never, ever forget that exact moment that, like, it wasn't freaking me out quite as bad. Like, I was still in shock when it was looking at me, but just complete tit fear hit me the moment its eyes hit me, because then I knew that I was completely recognized, and no longer was I, like, lost in that moment of what exactly am I looking at, and I was more terrified just that, oh, crap, this thing, it's looking right at me, it knows I'm here, and it doesn't look particularly pleased. We were, like, practically looking at each other the same look. Like, I remember sitting there, like, I know that my face must have been seized up. I must have looked, like, terrified, confused, and everything. My mouth was a little open, I'm sure. And this thing was doing the exact same thing. We probably stared at each other between 18 seconds. That thing, like, but the thing about it all was that it felt like legitimately an hour. Just it felt like time was all around me, and this thing was completely frozen. I remember my heart rate so high, and my vision, I could see with my vision, my eyes were pulsing. Like, you know, when your blood pressure spikes way up, and then you stop running, and you can feel, like, after you've done a long run, you can feel the pressure behind your eyes, and it's like every time your heart beats, it, like, moves your vision a little bit. That's what I was feeling. All my muscles were locked out. I just remember, like, coming out of it after the thing had finally left, and I was, like, squeezing my hands as hard as I could. Even my toes, my legs were locked up. I couldn't run. That was the physiological response I was having to just its presence and having the thing look at me.
Right.
We were looking at each other, and it finally, broke away its contact. It was hardcore staring me down, with a look of confusion, but then it yanked its head away from looking directly at me, down into the left, and scowled. All the facial muscles seized up really tight, deep wrinkles became more apparent on the face, the forehead, upper nasal structure. Even you could see the muscle flare out from the ascending radii area off the back of the jaw, that line where it transitions from the ear to going almost level toward the chin. I could see the muscle above that seize up really tight. And its lips scrunched up. It had thin lips, but it was human structured, but a wider mouth, very slightly wider. But when it scrunched its mouth up, its lips went very flat. There's a lot of flexibility in the oral structure. Also the teeth area, you could tell just when it turned away from me that the entire dental structure was thick. You could tell it, I don't want to say protruded, but it stuck out farther than what you would expect for a person, but nothing like a chimpanzee. So I could tell with its expression that it was it was the type of expression you'd have when you're trying to disassociate your thoughts from looking at something, almost imagine an old man in pure disgust of seeing a young teenager doing something that he doesn't approve of. You don't look at him, you disregard him, and you get a disgusted look. That was the behavior, very similar behavior, I do not approve of this type of reaction. It looked away, scrunched up its face, and then it just dropped its right arm, from the upright, 90-degree angle where how it was holding the fawn, draped over its forearm and in its hand. It just flopped it on the ground and then swung its right leg over, after kind of pivoting on the knee, its left knee, and swung its leg over toward the left, its right leg toward the left. And then it did a U-turn. Instead of cutting through the brush, it did a U-turn around the brush and hit the thickest part of the brush around the backside it could. The whole way, just kind of tearing it up and plowing it out of its way, deliberately, as if I'm pretty sure to this day that it was a show of strength. It was to demonstrate, you don't want to follow me because look what I can do type of thing. That's what I got. That's the sense I got of watching it. And it cut back kind of more toward heading back north, because it was going from north to south, now more of a northeastern direction, more north than east, but it was going that direction. I remember standing there, I wanted to run so bad, but I remember standing there for at least 2 minutes, completely terrified. Why can't I run? Why can't I run? I need to leave. This thing's going to come back. I just remember cycling through my head all the worst things that could possibly happen, but I was physically locked up. I could not move. But when I finally came out of it, the shock started to wear off just enough that I finally realized I could move after about 2 minutes. And the second I realized I could move, I'm leaving. And I turned and I ran the whole way back to my house, which at this point was about a third of a mile on the trail. But I didn't follow the trail. I was too freaked out. I just plowed right through blackberry brambles the whole way back. So it was more like a quarter mile. Okay. But
wow.
Went back to the house and I got my rifle, my mom, my dad, my cousin, and my brother. And I remember trying to load the magazine on my .303 British rifle. And I'd put 6 shots in the clip, 1 in the chamber, racked it, and had it off safety. And I was bringing my mom and my cousin and my dad and my brother. And my dad thought I was crazy and was telling me to stop making up stories. And I remember then, like, they saw me shaking so bad that I couldn't even get the magazine loaded in the rifle. Like, and I was pure white. I had sweat dripping down, like, my forehead and off my neck. And that's what convinced them to at least come look. Drugged them out there, and we looked at where it was at. But the whole time out, I'll never forget, I was reliving the experience even just walking back out that evening with them. Constantly thinking that around any tree this thing could still be there and jump out, and who knows. But we investigated the area. We looked at the dead fawn, which was still there. And at the point, finally, I forgot to mention, at the 2 minutes of standing there, I noticed that all the birds and squirrels and wildlife all of a sudden started doing alarm calls after about 2 minutes after it was gone. 1 minute to 2 minutes after it was gone. But I remember getting back out there, and that was the only comfort, was that when the thing was gone, all the animals were making noise, and when we got back out there, the animals were still chirping and freaking out. Particularly blue jays and squirrels were going off. And my cousin, actually, who was saying I was making the whole thing up, ended up finding 2 tracks in the bush line where it went, where I wasn't going to go in after it in that direction, but he did, and he found 2 tracks. And that pretty much sums up the bulk of the experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've heard it before. I've heard you tell in person, and I've had you on the show before, but it's still an amazing encounter because of the amount of detail you got. I mean, how long did this encounter? How long did it last? I mean, I'm sure you don't know exactly how long, obviously, but it seems like an eternity. How long did this encounter last?
Probably entirety from the point of first seeing it from the field and thinking it was the neighbor. It could have been over a minute and a half. Something like that, yeah, like a minute and a half. But
yeah, I mean, that's
yeah, I know, it's such a short-sounding amount of time, but a lot happened in that minute and a half, and at a close range. That was the biggest thing,
yeah.
You can have a very brief glimpse of something at close range and get a very good perception of what you're looking at.
Oh, absolutely.
At least in circumstances.
Your eyes are glued on this thing. I mean, your eyes are glued on this thing. I mean, this is your focus. I mean, this is what you're looking at, and you're taking it all in. Yeah.
Well, at
a minute.
Approximately 150 feet, my eyes were really glued on it, but before that, I was not so much, because I just assumed it was the neighbor. But up after 150 feet, I noticed there was odd angular and limb proportion differences that were very clear, and then my eyes were glued on it. Because up to that point, I was actually looking for deer around the field or anything spooked up by him or me. But at 150 feet, I walked about 30 more feet and dead stopped, realizing that that wasn't a neighbor guy.
Yeah.
Then I watched it. It probably took from the point of realizing at stopping at 120 feet, probably took the thing another 10 to 11 seconds, something like that. It's just over 10 seconds. I'll go with that. Clear the tree line, step out into sight, probably between 5 and 6 seconds. Or 5 and 10 seconds, I'll say. Yeah, between 5 and 10 seconds of it looking around, like up and down at the trail, outward, and then noticing me, and then the entire length of time that it stared at me, and then the time that it moved off. It took this thing about 3 seconds to get from the edge of the trail where I could get a good look at it to where I could only see its left shoulder, the shoulder blade, primarily its left side, back of its head, side of its profile, and its upper back as it kind of veered off to the east away from me. But I could see every muscle on the thing. and I'm quite familiar with anatomy between human beings and most of the primates. You could see the striated forearm muscles when it was holding the fawn, from the weight being on the arm. You could see the bicep. I could see the trapezius muscles to the connection point on the neck. You could see the larger neck muscle area. You could see the main two large supporting muscle and tendon attachment points that started at the base of the skull toward the spine, the back end of the neck vertebrae, all the way down toward the collarbone. I could see that muscle on the neck. I could see the tricep, very prominently. The tricep cast its own shadow. It was so large and developed. I could see the knob on the end of its forearm toward the back. I could see like all the striations, like I said, the little itty-bitty, like if you ever look at a rock climber on a rock climbing magazine and they're gripping something and putting all their weight, you look at their forearm, you'll see those separated lines crossing the rear end of the forearm, right where the connective muscles between the bicep and the radius are. You could see all of those defined lines. So they were very developed muscles. The thing looked like you would not want to shake its hand. It would break your hand.
Yeah, so you got I'm getting the impression that you were looking at a male Sasquatch. I mean, you didn't say anything about breasts or anything.
No, very, very clearly this thing had large pectoral muscles, very well developed. As a matter of fact, a good comparison for its build would be if you've ever looked at some of the Olympic sprinters on competitive photography shoots and ads, just completely chiseled and angular muscles. Very different from like someone who's just a weightlifter and somebody who's got an angular developed build, like a gymnast. Gymnasts have that type of build, and so do UFC fighters and Olympic sprinters. Just very lean and angular muscle development, muscles bulging off from the frame in different directions, just very clearly. The abdominal structure, I don't think it was top-bellied, but the top was rounded outward like the bottom of the pectoral muscle was. Strong, well-developed core. It would have made any bodybuilder sincerely jealous.
Yeah,
like
I hear that a lot.
You could see the main hip erector muscles that start at the base of the groin and wrap around the hip bone and go up toward the base of the obliques. You could see that muscle crowding over the top of the top of the hips. You could see that very clearly. The back muscles, just tremendous flared wing muscles off the base side of from where the deltoid begins and it flares down in toward the lower back. Just intense, just very. The thing just looks like. Basically, if you wanted to give a good comparison, it could have been somewhere between Dwayne Johnson and some other like major, some of the best.
Yeah. Don't mess with me. I'm big and huge and strong, and I own the woods. So yeah, I mean, that's just it's. I mean, that's reported. I mean, that's the muscles. You know, the figure as a whole just is you look at it and it just looks tremendously strong. I mean, just unbelievably strong. That's reported. Did you get a feeling as to a height? I mean, how big was this thing? I mean, did you think it was an adult? I mean, looking back on it now, was this thing more of an adult? I mean, you really don't have much to compare to, but I mean, this thing sounds big.
Structurally, its bone structure was adult, but like a young adult. Like, there's a difference between when you look at a 45-year-old man, very unlikely it is that he has the exact same frame he had when he was 20. You know, in the older male figure, both on primates, like other primates like gorillas and chimps, the frame thickens out, the bone structure thickens out, the neck isn't usually quite as long. like on humans, for instance. But this thing, it had a very young-looking frame, just very, very in its prime, if you will. But it was probably on the order of, I want to say 6'2" to 6'3", possibly 6'4". I remember I was a teenager. I was like 15 years old at the time. Everything seems big to me probably at that age. But probably 350 pounds, 360 pounds,
not
or
your
something
neighbor.
like that. Probably. Yeah, not my neighbor. Not my 200-pound 5'9" neighbor. No, it was much larger than him.
Yeah. What
was,
about the color? What about the color of this thing? I mean, did it match the surroundings? I mean, did the color that you saw, and I want you to describe it a little bit and talk about it, but did the color make sense to you when you saw it, and what color was it?
Well, this is the interesting thing. In the shade, I would have swore to you at first that whatever it was jet black. But then when it stepped into the sun, there was a very large amount of the light that was casted off was a deep brown and almost reddish tinge to it after it hit the sun. Just like if you look at, there's black cats and then there's black farm cats, like that are mixed. Their genetics are mixed with other different breeds and such. And at night they look black, or in the shade they look black. But when they step in the sun, any transparency on the edge of their hair at all, and they look reddish brown. That was very similar to what this animal had as far as coloration. Not hair patterning whatsoever, just the coloration. When it hit sun, it turned more brown and reddish in color. It looked like.
What was its hair matted? Was it nasty? Was it looked like it was maintained? I mean, and how long was the hair? Or fur? I always assume hair, but some people describe more of a fur, even though they're referring to hair. But I would assume that you're talking about hair.
It's not a fur. It's not a fur whatsoever. Yeah. Fur is like when you look at a cottontail rabbit, that's fur. When you look at a chimpanzee, and that's body hair. That is, structurally it's slightly different. It's a very different feel. The texture is different. Even the way the keratin is composed, as I understand, is a little bit different than what fur is. But no, this thing, it had hair. It was thick. It was like way thicker than human body hair. But it wasn't like a rabbit. It wasn't like quite like a German Shepherd or something like that. It was very stylized. It followed the flow of muscle on the body, the direction of the hair did. For instance, if you look at chimpanzees, the hair on the forearm flows downward and flares down off the bottom of the forearm and clips back, like kind of turns backward toward the tip of the elbow, kind of flaring off the elbow a little bit. You could see that the kneecaps didn't really have a lot of hair on them. They looked pretty bald, calloused even almost, I would say. You could see hair that was there, but it wasn't like at nearly as thick. You could see skin. Skin color was ash gray, straight up ash gray with darker pigmented like flicks on the skin in tones. Almost not quite like age spots, but smaller on the face, hands, and like parts of the body where there was thinner hair. It looked like there was some slight pigmentation differences. If I were to estimate his age, looking at him, he looked like an 18, 19-year-old. And I know that's basing on human years, but like frame, developmental-wise, that young adult,
in its prime. Yeah, in its prime, it sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah. Like very, very athletic.
Yeah, very athletic. But continuing on with the hair a little bit. Now, you mentioned the knees. What about, the hands, the feet, and the hair around the face? Was there, describe that a little bit.
or one part that particularly stands out is that there was a thinness around the neck, right around where the muscle that was visible on the neck that connects from the base of the skull, where the vertebrae go up into the bottom of the skull. That there's the two main erector muscles that run from the collarbone, wrap around your trachea, past your Adam's apple, and up behind your ear. There was a thinness of hair right at the base there, at the top of the chest, very slightly, and up behind toward the ear, looked like very slightly, like underneath the jaw, just slightly under the jaw. There was a thinness of hair. It was thin around the lips. There was hair. I want to say that it looked like there was hair crowding, like up around, the temple area. Like on a human being, the temple is usually mostly exposed on people. The hair crowded close to the temple, up to the edge of the eye, but not all the way up. It was about 1.5 inches down, almost to the brow. Again, maybe my measurement's off based on skull size and trying to measure it, but if you on a human being, it would be like 1.5 inches. Most of the forehead had hair descending down. Slight widow's peak toward the nasal structure, downward. The hair flared up under the cheekbone, wrapped up toward the edge of the nose, and then receded back around where the facial creases were starting on its face, and then wrapped around the mouth, under the chin, and again peeked upward toward the bottom of the lip, and then kind of peeked down and around. I did a sketch or two a while back kind of depicting the type of hair patterning that I was observing on the face. But it was completely bald of hair underneath the eyes, over the front of the cheekbones, like toward the nose. Bald. The upper lip looked bald at the distance I was at, but it may in fact not have been. It just might have been so thin compared to the rest of it, and I wasn't able to see. I don't know. But it looked like there were facial creases. There was at least 3 or 4 lines of deep facial creases that wrapped around the corner of the mouth from the top of the nose, like the hood of the nose. It wrapped from the base of the nostrils all the way down around the corners of the mouth. The hairline kind of followed suit.
Well, I want to talk more about the facial features and whatnot. I got a lot of questions here, and I know most of them, but for the audience. But I don't think you mentioned the length of the hair. It sounds like it wasn't super long.
No, it wasn't super long. It was between 3 and 4 inches, most of it, possibly 4.5 inches at the longest parts, maybe off the top of the head toward the rear, the base of the skull. Maybe into the inner back it was a little bit thicker, like following the spine down. It was thicker in the pelvic and genitalia area, obviously, which I was able to see the genitalia as well.
Oh.
It is obvious, obviously male, completely obviously a male. Just, again, by musculature alone, without seeing anything else, like I told you, it was male. The muscle in the legs also, I will, just for note, just the incredible power just at looking at the legs. The legs of this thing looked like, on the quad, it looked like a big rectangular, like, knot on top, right down to the kneecap. It bowed inward toward the knees and then flared out again as you approached, going over the peak of the calf muscle, which, again, looked like a giant. It looked huge. It just looked a huge rectangular, boxy-shaped muscle hanging off from behind the front of the tibia. Just,
yeah.
I mean,
well, people are going to ask, because you mentioned it. People are going to ask about the genitalia area. I mean, you obviously thought that this was a male, more than just the muscular extremities, muscular aspect to this thing. Without being too, getting into too many, I guess, details and whatnot. But I mean, you saw the genitalia. I mean, I'm thinking in my head, if you're looking at, great apes, grills and stuff, So, I mean, this thing had, I mean, you could, at the time, make out the genitalia, correct?
Yeah, completely. Not completely detailed. A lot of it was enveloped in hair, but there was an extremity there. There was a member.
Okay.
It was also, I will note, it was dark in coloration, very obviously just like the skin. I don't remember if it was slightly darker. Let's just say that wasn't my focus, just that it was there. It was proportionally to its frame. It didn't look like, I know in some of the greater apes, it looks smaller proportionally to their body and muscle mass.
Right.
That's not the case in apparently male Sasquatch of the northeastern region.
Yeah. I've it's one of those things that there have been reports of people seeing, the genitalia area of male Sasquatches, and it's described differently. But there's a lot that goes into what you're looking at, and so was the creature excited? Was it what's going on there? So yeah, we'll leave it at that. It had to be said and talked about a little bit. But I know the viewers going to be interested in this. Really want to hear you describe the facial features a little bit more specifically. Like, did you see ears? The nose, was it? You mentioned hooded earlier. Was it hooded? Was it flat? And the eyes, the color of the eyes. I mean, can you describe the head? Describe the head.
Okay, I can tell you right now that the head on the individual I saw was very slightly conical toward the back, sloping forehead back to a rear peak in the skull, which, if you think about it, makes sense with the cheekbone structure behind and where the ascending radii of the jaw, the main attachment muscles, wrap up and under the flared cheekbone, and then attach at the base of the skull on a lot of the greater apes toward the back of the crest. Again, this thing's jaw was extremely developed. The jaw muscle was very strong. It wasn't like looking at a gorilla skull type thick, but it was much thicker than typical human. And so I would assume that the muscle wrapped farther up onto the head and toward the base of the skull in the back, and therefore adding to that crest, peak, or whatever you want to call it. Also, the flow of the hair kind of probably helps. It was a little bit longer off the base of the head, from the top of the head wrapping backward over the back of the head. But the head looked slightly peaked in the back, with a lot of muscle built up to it. The nose was hooded. I don't want to say it was not flat whatsoever. It has a side profile, but it's tilted very slightly upward and flared nostrils, very, very wide nostrils, to take in a lot of air, obviously. They were able to move that facial structure. It moved. I remember when it came from surprise, seeing how flared they were, just flaring them outward, and then scrunching up its face. I could see that structure change. But very structurally in the face, it looked like a older Mongolian man. As far as like facial structure, just very high and tight cheekbones, deep eye crevices, a lot almost squinted eyes appearance, heavy furrowed brow, but again with that Neanderthal type base skull thickened structure. Just very, imagine that whole facial construction but thickened, and then the skin color.
Yeah, it's funny because what you're describing reminds me of the Patterson-Gimlin film when I'm looking at Patty, the high cheekbones and stuff, and of course, it's old film, but when I look at Patty, I kind of see what you're describing in my head a little bit. Of course, we're talking about a male Sasquatch, but it just reminds me of the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Actually, the Patterson-Gimlin film subject would appear to be a middle-aged female, like comparatively in my head to what I saw, which is a young male. But one of the main striking differences, again, for me, was just the shoulder structure. Shoulder-to-torso structure of the male is very contrasted compared to the wider hips of, like, Patty, for instance. This had a tapered in pelvis, which is unusual if you think about most of the primates and more archaic human branches. They had wider pelvises. This may in fact be wide, but not wide for its overall structure. The upper body was very developed and clearly wider than the hip and buttock region, just very clearly. Much narrower than the shoulders and such.
Yeah. So the eyes, this thing's looking at you. You got a clear, you guys locked eyes. Were the eyes, how big would you, were these big eyes? Were they deep setted into the skull or into the face? And color, what was the color?
Okay, I will say that at 4:30 in the afternoon, the sun is coming in from the back, like the sun is behind me, shining onto the back of my head and over me and onto this thing. There's a lot of shadow cast onto the dark, like wherever there was shadow, it was hard to look at what was in the shadow. I cannot tell you specifically what color the eyes were. I would assume that they were either dark brown, or something very dark, because I could not, in fact, make out a real color. But if I were to guess, and again, if they were deep brown or something like that, if there was sclera visible, I'm not entirely sure. Color, like when it was profiled to the side and I saw it moving, like I feel like, again, as you're talking about a very minute detail, at enough of a distance it would have been hard to read. But I feel like my impression is, if I think back just to a flash impression in my head of what it looked like, I pictured that there was a very small amount of sclera visible on the corners of the eyes. But not like...
Big eyes, though, I would imagine. Big eyes. I would imagine, having seen the eyes at 150 feet, they would have to be pretty large.
Well, they I'm sure they were, but again, he wasn't an 8-foot monster. He was just a big 6'3" or whatever. But and he was squinting, because when he was to the side, he wasn't squinting as hard. But when he looked right at me, he was looking into the sun pretty much. So he was squinting it possibly very, very heavily, and that may have also affected to how much I was able to view, because the eyelids crowd down and there's shadow, and it was difficult to say. But again, I would say that the eyes were not large compared to its head, but large in general, because the whole thing was large. And dark color.
Well,
but they weren't deep into the skull. So they were not super deep into the skull. The brow ridge furrowed out heavily, and the cheekbone crowded up around, but I don't think they were like inset. I don't think you could have, like, for instance, if you were handling the head of it, like on a table or something, I don't think you could have, like, put your thumb inside the eye socket and gone upward at all with any cavity space between the eyelid and where the skin cups upward into the skull. I don't think there was any space inside. No, I don't think there was. I don't think it was deep inside.
Okay. Well, some of the other things that really interest me about hearing reports where people have actually got an up-close personal sighting are what we mentioned, the nose. What about the ears? I'll give you two questions here. What about the ears? Did you see ears? And was there, what was the, I don't know if you can answer this. I don't know if you ever told me, but the beside the ears, what was like the gap between the nose and the mouth? Was it did it look like there was quite an extreme
you're talking about the
distance-wise? Yes,
base of the cleft in the nose. And the of the upper lip. It was slightly lower, very slightly. I would not say heavily. I wouldn't say it was long like when you look at a gorilla. You got this huge sloping downward lip structure, goes all the way down to the thin lips, and then you have the whole protruding oral cavity and such. Nothing like that. There was, if you look at some Aboriginal tribes, just by happenstance, their dental structure is slightly more forward than say Eastern European and such, just by the way their skull is shaped. They're genetically different, so their skull is a different shape. And the oral cavity is slightly forward. In the tooth structure, the structure of the teeth and dental arrangement is slightly forward too. On this thing was like that. It was slightly down, just a little bit hair longer than what a normal human being would have, maybe a 1/10 to an 1/8 more downward than ours, and slightly forward. It looked like the teeth stuck forward very slightly, outward, but not like leaning at any degree. Teeth were still straight up and down. It's just that the whole oral structure just looked built. Just like if you look at some people who've been in boxing long enough, they've taken a few hits to the face, their oral structure thickens out from calcification and gum swelling and stuff like that, just like that.
Gotcha. Well, and the ears, did you notice any ears?
Someone else asked me this like a year ago, and I told them that could make out there was a structure under some of the hair where the ear was. And it didn't look terribly large. It wasn't like a chimpanzee where you have big flared ears. That's just ridiculous. The ears that I was seeing when it was looking at me, I couldn't see tips of the ears. So they were laying pretty flat, and the hair was covering most of them. Same color as the face, the light ash gray. But they were under mostly hair. But I could see there was a structure there, like when it was profiled, I was looking up and down at the quad track. I could see that there was a structure under the hair. So there was definitely ears, and they were visible, but it wasn't like looking at the whole thing exposed outward from the hair. I guess he just didn't comb his hair that day. I don't know how you'd want to put that. But, it was. They were laying pretty flat to the head. They're pretty contoured to the skull.
You have this individual, this Sasquatch out there, and what was the weather like that day? I'm curious as to what the weather was like that day and the wind direction. Do you think this thing picked up? It just locked eyes with you because it just saw you, or do you think it smelt you, or just knew someone was in the area?
That is an interesting thing, and I'd been thinking about that very heavily. The reason I was heading up the trail that way is that normally the wind is coming in from the west, particularly the southwest, normally. But I decided, being I was scouting for deer, you can't scout for deer with a bad wind. You can't. You will lose. You will not find deer. It just doesn't work that way. So I went out that day because we had an unusual wind pattern for the area. The wind was coming from the north. It was swirling a bit off the cleft of the hill toward the road near my property, but I don't know to what degree. I don't remember. I wasn't exactly wetting my finger and testing the air as that was happening, but my guess, based on the reasoning I was operating under when I was going out in the first place, is that the wind was toward my face, slightly from the north. So I think the wind was coming from the direction of the creature toward me. Possibly why it did not notice me. Maybe if they can smell humans, if their sense of smell is that sensitive, I think the wind was in my favor that day. And I feel as though it just eyeballed me, like just saw me at the corner of its eye and just finally just got a lock on me. Because before that, he had no clue that I was even there. No clue. I'm certain of that. Like, approaching the trail, this thing had zero clue I was there.
Yeah, didn't hear you, didn't smell you. You crept up, and obviously, pardon me, moving very stealthily. You weren't like tromping to the woods.
No, I was deliberately trying to be quiet to approach deer in the bedding area near this rock pile. Oh, something that should be noted specifically. The area that this creature was coming from was toward 3 large rock piles. This area I knew the fawn and the does were bedding near. That's why I was going out to see how frequently it was being used, count how many beds, get how many deer, find grazing spots. fresh scat. The unusual thing is, upon looking at the dead fawn after we'd come back with the gun and my family, the skull was crushed inward, straight from the skull cap, directly over the eye sockets of the fawn. Completely crushed in. It looked like a bludgeoned blow, like one strike. You could push your finger. The skin was still there. There was a single laceration, and you could push your finger physically on the top of the forehead of the fawn and push right down into the brain case.
Yeah. Well, this area. I mean, does will lead their fawns, in these areas in the tall grass, and they'll just.
That's what's between the rock piles, with tall grass.
Yeah, and the does the fawns, will kind of just hunker down, lay there. I would imagine.
That's the point of their spottedness, is to blend into grass.
Exactly. And so it'd be a great.
Walked on the fawns there.
I mean, can you describe this area, the terrain, a little bit? I mean, why would Sasquatch be there? Obviously, it had taken a fawn, but what's beyond the area? I mean, where did this thing come from? What are is there a tremendous amount of water sources, mountains, hills? I mean, you got a rock pile. I've heard rock pile and tall grass, and this. I got a little bit of idea in my head, but.
We are
can you describe this whole area?
Yeah. We're right on the nose. What we call, if you look at Michigan on the map, basically hold your hand up at the mitten, right? Right about your knuckles area, central Michigan, the middle knuckle on your hand, that would be right mid-Michigan. That's right where I'm at. The entire, from the knuckle up on your hand all the way up to the tip of Michigan is mostly coniferous forest mix. Slightly different elevational changes, more river systems, lakes, and swamps. The southern half of Michigan is primarily agricultural. It's an old industrial field area further down the state. But what's interesting is this is the place where you have large agricultural fields smashing smack into river systems veined out with coniferous forest and state forestry area. This is where food, water, and cover all converge very heavily. Like the three main points you need are right there. That is where I live. Like you drive 3 miles from my house, there's a highway. You cross the road of that highway and you can walk in the woods for 15 miles straight through forest, pretty much, all the way north going upward towards Houghton Lake. So it
sounds like if I was a Sasquatch, this would be an area I'd be in. You got food, water, and an area where you can actually hide in. Apparently, this Sasquatch was caught off guard or whatever. But I hear that from a lot of times from hunters. So that doesn't surprise me.
In Michigan, in the data composition map that I was doing, both in reports and in the forest composition map, there was correlations I was finding. One, the primary witness was either deer hunting or trapping along a very heavily forested waterway that was not thick enough to be severely fished, but really tucked into the forest and off the beaten path. You had to really work to get in there. Also, they were within 1 mile of a large cedar swamp bog, which, if you think about it, this is a high acid content soil. This is where blueberries grow, raspberries grow, blackberries grow. All primary large omnivore-based diets converge at points like this. It's not a coincidence. It's data. And the interesting part about that, if you map it out, I live on a 7-acre plot of land. 5 acres of which is purely blackberries, fringed upon my grandma's property, which is a swamp system which veins off of the Muskegon River. So it's not a guessing game as to how and why this entire event even happened. We are at the point where food meets heavy cover that is both suitable for the wintertime, because cedar bogs, hunters will not enter deeply into cedar bogs. There's muck, what Michigan people call quicksand. It's not really quicksand, it's muck. But it goes over waist high and over your head in some places. It's high acid content. It breaks down bones and calcium and all vegetation super quickly. And it's very rich in nutrients after it breaks all those things down. And the bacteria actually keep it warm enough that it never really freezes to the bottom. It stays exposed water. Like it could be 20 below zero outside, and there's a thin cap of ice over the top, and I could punch through it and get water. And they're also warmer because the heat is pinned down by these bogs, these large cedar swamp bog tracks. The heat is pinned under all the coniferous forest. It can't go anywhere. The wind can't drive it out like it does in a barren, empty, deciduous forest in the wintertime. You know, leafless trees, the wind is driving, you freeze. This is why you'll hear old hunters all the time harp that the best hunting spots in November are along the cedar bogs, because they call the deer that hide in the cedar bogs their swamp donkeys. It's an old term. But this is what the wise old bucks do to avoid hunters and predators. And the Sasquatch would know this. They would know based on the hunting season that why would you leave your house, i.e. the cedar bog, if your food or your refrigerator is migrating toward you? This is why wintertime sightings almost completely disappear in Michigan in the wintertime, because I don't think they're moving. And again, the data from the summertime correlates with this because it expands. If you can take a map of Michigan and plot the sightings from like April and May and look at them, like make a little GIF of April, May, June, July, and August, and you will find that they're all the way around large cedar bogs and river systems, and they go outward. Like you push May, they go a quarter mile, sightings start popping up around the cedar bog. Summertime, like June and July, they're about a mile outside of the cedar bog. And then right around August, they're between 3 and 5 miles outward from the cedar bog, following creek veins, small rivers, and forested fingers that come outward or along elevational changes. And then you start looking toward October, November, the colder months, vegetation level goes down and the deer start going back toward those places. The sightings, again, and the vocalization reports, again, start going back toward, like shrinking. The range starts shrinking of reports back toward the cedar bog and the river system. So there's
that's very interesting because that shows patterns, predictability, and I would assume, living in Michigan, having your knowledge and the knowledge of other hunters and whatnot, that if you're looking for Sasquatch or interested in the subject, you can look at some of these patterns of predictability with, deer and other, known animals. I mean, there's patterns here. There's predictability. That's very interesting and very pertinent.
Well, anytime that you have biology operating underneath normal physics, I mean, they're animals. They get hungry. They need sleep. They need water. They need cover. They're going to need all the same exact things. You can use a very, very similar data map between a bear and for a Bigfoot. It's not rocket science to figure out the basic pattern. To, in fact, get to the technical aspect of getting within, good thermal video distance, that's debatable. But I've been close a couple of times, and using my own data, I've managed to locate 4 different locations in Michigan on my own, using my data, that have come up with very, very positive results for what is reported to be Sasquatch activity. Tracks, audio, visuals, and other behaviors and findings, like handprints on windows that are like 12 inches by 10 inches, things like that. Just tons of data, and that is correlating to these factors, which I first observed near my home, because the activity continued for several years around my home. And I'm not to make the complete assumption it was the same one, but the one that always showed up sounded about the same, sounded young, always the same size tracks. One time I found a different size track, very young one, very small. But and multiple interactions with the one that was hanging around throughout the years. There were nights you could go out in my backyard and you could yell something, and the thing would yell back. And then you'd yell again, and it'd yell back. Or rocks would get thrown into the yard. Remember one time, deer hunting one year, I was hearing trees getting shaken so hard that leaves were falling off. I could see the top of one of the trees over my tree stand at about 6:30 in the morning was being waved around as if it was like someone was waving a flag on a piece of PVC. It was like waving around ridiculously, and there was grunting and screaming and knocking going on. But again, there was repeated interaction throughout years. My neighbors had experiences with giant people on their property that were messing with things that they were calling giant people. One of my neighbors said that there was a big man, for instance, a little mini apple orchard, like 8 or 9 major trees. And one day he said he saw a man that his head was coming up to the bottom of the limbs early in the morning outside picking apples off of his tree. And he said the funny part is he stands under that apple tree and he can't touch the branch that its head came to. So. Yeah,
it sounds like there's a history. Sounds like there's a history in this area of ongoing activity. You know, Seth Breedlove, Small Town Monsters, does these fantastic documentaries and movies on stories like this. And this is exactly what it reminds me of, where you just got a period of time in some of these remote areas where Sasquatch seems to hunker down and kind of bother the neighbors and bother individuals and hang around, and nobody really knows why they do it. Eventually it dissipates, but there's like this period of time where they're there and they're making themselves known. I haven't heard of anything really. I mean, this is like probably the most recent sort of event, that I've heard of. I mean, there's been a few others, I guess, but this, with your sighting, with your neighbors, claiming to see stuff and hear stuff and calling it the big man. I mean, this is pretty dang interesting. But I want to shift gears. I mean, not even shift gears a little bit. I want to get back to a little bit about your personal experience this with your first sighting or your initial sighting. Sorry, where you saw this thing. Your heart's beating through your head. You could hear your the blood pumping and everything else. Back in 2011, in August, up here in Oregon, I had an encounter, and I remember in my tent. I remember being in my tent where I felt, and I know we talked about this before, Nathaniel, but I remember laying in my tent feeling paralyzed. I could hear my heart beating, blood was pumping in my ears. I mean, it was unreal how, and I was freaked out. But, eventually I came to, and I started rationalizing stuff, like I'm still alive, nothing's hurt me, blah, blah, blah. So I never felt like what people describe as, infrasound, being zapped or sizzled, as the Bigfoot community calls it.
Oh,
but
okay.
it doesn't sound like you were zapped or sizzled or infrasound was, you were just afraid. You were just afraid. You were frozen with fear. And fear is natural. I was fearful. I mean, is that how you felt?
Yeah. Well, the fear probably had a very heavy hand in it, but there is to causing that physiological response. But do I necessarily think that is the entire reason that people think they're being zapped? Not entirely. No. A good part of what I think that is,
I agree,
is there is data among other animals and human being interaction showing that there's pheromonal reaction. So if you think about it, a large predator, for instance, is going to be downwind of its prey, so its prey can't smell it, right? Well, think of that moment of when you're like playing as a young kid, you're playing like water balloon fights, airsoft, whatever, paintball, and that someone finally comes into view and you're about ready to get them, and your heart starts racing, your adrenaline's pumping, you start sweating. By the end of the game, you smell like you've played football for 12 hours. I think large part of it is that there is a pheromonal response by these things coming into your camp. They have a body odor, and we might have an instinctual reaction for instance, even if I can't smell a Bigfoot, I may in fact have a pheromonal reaction to the animal's presence if it just simply, I don't know, wafts up under my tent flap and the animal's walking around my camp, and my body has a response where I feel like I'm paralyzed, I'm locked up. This is what happens to deer that you get too close to. You get too close and they just lock up for about a minute, and then you get super, super close and they finally bolt. But they lock up. I think humans have possibly have a similar reaction that it could be caused by a pheromonal reaction from the animal being in your presence. And I think I totally agree with you. I'm not saying that Sasquatch are not capable of some sort. We obviously. No. That was my thinking as to what.
It's fantastic, and I agree with you. But there's no animals out there that do.
The wind was a good wind for me, so that may have been why I may not, at least in theory, may not have had such a response as being zapped, per se.
Right. I think the word infrasound gets tossed around too freely, especially when there's no sighting. It's just, somebody feels paralyzed, or, and then it's reported, here and there, but the pheromones, I truly believe that is a big portion of it, as well as just, when you encounter something unknown, it's as a hunter, as a hiker, that it's something you've never experienced before, whether you see something or not. The fear, just adrenaline rush. It's amazing what it does to the human body. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times it can be explained as just fear and adrenaline. I'm not saying Sasquatch is not capable of it, but I think 9 times out of 10, if it's a legitimate encounter, you're dealing with either pheromones, like you mentioned, or just a complete fear of seeing something or encountering something unknown. Yeah.
Actually, there's a very interesting correlation I personally made about something that may or may not be related to this. I took my girlfriend and my parents out with me to Oregon for a BFRO expedition here last year, or this year. I'm sorry, it was this summer. Shoot, it was July. Time is flying. And we were on a night hike. I believe it was the last night. Me and my mom and my dad, we were playing follow the leader maneuver. I had 2 people lagging, my parents, and they were by themselves listening behind us, and we were in the front, me and my girlfriend, Holly. And we got up the hill, and I could hear something paroling, finally something up on the ridge after we'd been singing and doing a couple hand claps and stomping, kicking some rocks off of a ledge, just being obnoxious in the environment pretty much, or possibly interesting depending on what Sasquatch you are or person. And the interesting thing was we got up to one point, and the wind started clipping over the top of this ridge and flowing down the hill. Well, not wind, it was a breeze, very, very slight breeze. But it was enough to feel it on your face. The air pressure was changing. And out of nowhere, I could hear something moving, and then right in the same moment, I'm noticing something moving in our direction. About 30 seconds later, my mom radioed me for about 100 yards down the hill behind us, saying she was feeling ill, feeling a little sick, and not wanting to hike anymore and wanting to stop. She just wasn't feeling great. At the time, I chalked it up to she just wasn't up for hiking at the moment. But then all of a sudden, about 5 minutes passed because we're stopped and listening to this thing, and I asked my girlfriend to just sing a couple of soft words out and see what would happen, and just walk around with me in circles. We'd go there, sit down, we put our head down in our laps. We started tossing little pebbles down the road a little bit. We had my parents stop and do the same thing. And next thing you know, the sound comes right up to the edge of the road, right up, maybe 40 feet off the shoulder and up on this ledge. It's probably 20 feet up above us, and we could hear something pacing up in there. And all of a sudden, my girlfriend kind of stands up and comes over to me and says that she's not feeling good either, and that she's feeling kind of sick. She was having an unusual response. She felt shaky, and she wasn't afraid. I mean, we didn't know what it was. I mean, we'd heard other things moving all night, rabbits and critters, but this sounded different. But in particular, my mom and her both got sick at approximately the same time, feeling sick and ill and kind of nervous at the same time for this one chance, this one particular noisemaker in the woods. So we walked a little bit farther, and then we walked back after doing a couple of knocks. We went to bed at approximately midnight, like 12:12 or something like that. And at 4:16 to 4:26 in the morning or something like that, started knocking like crazy, just completely destroying the piece of wood that it was hitting on the tree. Just bam, bam, bam. Pause, and there was bam, 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 5 or 6 more. And I woke up in the morning, and I assumed it was one of our teams back on the other camp and walked up the road and decided to kind of rudely do a bunch of knocks right outside of our camp across the road, probably 120 yards away. And I went back to camp that morning and we found out from the expedition leader, Cindy, that no team left camp that night whatsoever to come up our direction after midnight, 4 to 4 in the morning. And so we went out the next morning in search of where the animal could have been or whatever it was could have been knocking from, and found no evidence of where people had broke the road or fresh boot prints going off or anybody had done anything, nothing like that. So coincidentally, something showed up approximately 4 in the morning and was just knocking like crazy for about a minute straight. Again, in accordance with that same exact experience that we had earlier in the night, too. So I don't know. But, yeah.
It's very...
My mom told me about it the next morning. She's the one who's worried. Did you go out of your tent at 4 in the morning and give it a final shot and try wood knocking last night? And I said, no, but you heard that too? And she's like, yeah. That was the first wood knocks my mom had gotten here that could have possibly been Sasquatch related in over 20 years.
Wow.
So,
well,
yeah.
I mean, that's profound and very interesting. To backtrack a little bit, to give the audience a little bit, a little knowledge on your background. What got you? I mean, were you interested in Sasquatch before you had your initial encounter? Did you hear of any stories or anything in the area that you lived in at the time in Michigan? What got you interested in this subject? Because I want to touch upon something that happened to you up here in up there in Washington with Shelley Covington. I want to touch upon that. But what got you initially? I mean, was there any? What was your initial thoughts on Sasquatch before you had your encounter?
My mom told me that when she was younger, when she told me this like when I was 8 or 9, that she saw a Bigfoot, just very matter-of-factly, when she was a teenager in the gravel pit across the road from my grandma's house, which is approximately 1.5 miles from my house now, possibly by on the map, toward the west and slightly south. My grandmother owned the same property for a long time, and my mom was given the piece of property by my grandmother. So we put a house there, and that's where I grew up. It's next door to my grandma, pretty much. That's why we have our properties adjoined and everything. So she had an experience when she was like 16, 17, and a visual experience with what she said looked like a Bigfoot, just a big, really tall, like an 8-foot tall, long-armed man thing that was all dark-colored. She said it was probably 100 yards away, and it just crossed the 2-track in popple, a load of cut popple, and it just was moving them over, moving through them. She remembered it stepping over a large fallen oak that was across the path. She said that oak they'd crossed so many times before, like to go to the gravel pit across the trail, you have to climb over it. The animal just stepped over it. Didn't put its hand on it and step, like over it 1 foot and then the other. No, like with leading its legs, it just stepped over it and kept walking, like as if there was nothing there. And her cousin, she tried to keep her cousin from seeing it, so she really quickly turned him to the side while still watching it, and told him to look over to the right, whispered for him to be quiet and to look over to the right, and that we had a game. She told my cousin that we were playing a game to keep him distracted from looking at it, and that it was to be who could be the most quiet and close their eyes, or something like that, I believe. And it worked. He never saw it, or he didn't freak out or start screaming and crying, because she was afraid that this thing would double back if it hurt a kid crying and freaking out. So right then and there, she turned around and walked them from the gravel pit back to Grandma's house and told my grandmother. And
so
we had neighbors that would tell us all the time.
You had a little bit of knowledge. You had a little bit of an experience, as far as listening to your mother talk about Sasquatch. And continue on. Yeah.
When it would come on, the really old one, I think it was like the Sasquatch Meet Science or whatever. Yeah, she put that on. We were interested when we'd watch it, and she would go, I saw one a long time ago. They're real. And, I blew my mother off. I told her that I didn't think it was real and that she was just telling me a story. But my mom's not a liar, see, and she was kind of offended when I told her I thought she was making up a story. And so here I am. It was in 2009, after my sighting, here I am apologizing to my mother for basically calling her a liar and not believing her. And then I think back to my grandmother and my aunt, who also grew up, and her college friend said that they would go camping and they would hear someone or something drumming on trees with firewood at night around their campsite. They didn't know a thing about wood knocks or Bigfoot, nothing.
Yeah, that's a relatively new term or idea that has come out. But Nathaniel, so after your initial encounter, where did that leave you? It pretty much you hear people talk about. We've had people on the show that have said this that you either kind of hide it or you feel like an obligation to do something about it or get more involved in the subject. After your initial encounter, I know where you're at now. I know that aspect of it. But for the audience, you had this encounter. Where did that lead you? What were your thoughts at the time? How did that launch you into where you're at now?
Well, as a kid, at the time of the experience, I was mortified of being outside, especially after dark, for about 2.5, 3 months. October rolled up and November rolled up and I forced myself to go out deer hunting. But my cousin went out with me at twilight, and there were some mornings that I just didn't want to go out because I was so freaked out still. But it was so bad that for the first 2 months, I couldn't even go out at night to the refrigerator to get a glass of cold water because the kitchen was dark and we had a big sliding glass window. And if I did go to the kitchen, I had to sneak my hand around the corner and turn the light on first and kind of glance at the window to make sure there was nothing there, and open the fridge facing the window, and then really quick turn my head just long enough to grab the pitcher and get out. That's how bad it was. I was paranoid of windows and the dark. I would not feed the animals outside at night. I would not go out to the shed to get something out of the freezer for my mom. I would make somebody else go do it. My bunk bed used to be against, when my cousin was living with me at the time of the sighting, he's the one that went out and found the track. We were sharing a room. The bunk bed used to be against the window in my room. So I could look out at night and eyeball any raccoons in the yard that I needed to dispose of. because they were trying to kill our cats. But anyways, yeah, the bunk bed used to be right there. After that experience, that bunk bed went to the other side of the wall and wedged up as tight to the door as humanly possible, just wide enough that you could get through with your shoulders. And so that my thinking was that if that thing did try to come into my room and break through the window, like I remember my young brain thinking, well, if I pull the bunk bed over by the door as close as I can jump off the bunk bed and pull the bunk bed as close to the door as possible and then close the door and it can't get in. Like, that was my mentality. My entire mentality for maneuvering around my house for about 2 months was warped. Like, I didn't feel safe in any room alone. Going into the restroom terrified me. So I would, we had finally put up curtains in the restroom so you couldn't see out the window and you couldn't see in. Because I was terrified that this thing was looking in to the rooms of the house. And then I had to go in after that, watch Boggy Creek, and terrify myself all over again. Because there's that scene in the documentary or docudrama where it breaks in the window and grabs the guy in the bathroom, and I relived that again about a year later. It was awful. But yeah, man.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. Terrifying. But yeah, my dad didn't believe me for the longest time, for about 2 months, and then right around October, the thing started hanging around, making noises. When he'd get up to go to work, you'd hear it outside, knocking, whooping. Sometimes rocks were getting thrown into the yard. Stuff in our woods, we'd set up forts. We'd find our forts torn apart, tree stands moved or bent off the tree. Bent, yes, physically bent off the tree. Metal stands. We would find rocks that were half buried in the ground on the trail, pulled out of the ground, and moved about 100 yards up the trail and put right in the middle of the trail. Like this big quartz boulder that we used to have, I call it a boulder, it probably weighed 50 pounds, was pulled out of the ground one day. The beginning of the trail of our yard, it was laying in the middle of the trail. With half of it was dirty, half of it was clean. Because you could see where half of it was in the ground for so long. And it was laying on the trail. So I don't know if, I can't necessarily say that Bigfoot was responsible for it, but it was correlated with nights where we'd hear the thing out there. And then this type of thing would happen. And then there would be...
Yeah, but you all this stuff's going on. And I mean, you didn't just, it didn't just end there. You eventually, as I know you, Nathaniel, pursued the subject to many extremes.
Yeah.
I mean, moving from Michigan out to the Pacific Northwest and actually having a lot happen out here. So, I mean, there's a lot going on there. I mean, what really propelled you to move to the Pacific Northwest? Yeah.
Yeah, that happened 2013. No, what year was that? Shoot, was that just a year? It was a couple of years ago now. Jeez. Yeah. I was partnered up to be a part of what was intended to be a major project, expeditionary project, out in the backcountry for extended periods of time to do data collection on a large wilderness area.
We're talking about, I'm going to mention it, the Falcon Project. That's what you were intended to join up with and partake in. Unfortunately, things went sour.
I was going to be one of the main data collectors on the Falcon Project for nighttime thermal observation and data collection, as well as audio. They're responsible for audio, data collection, long-term devices, and such like that I had designed. I was going to implement those into the project to try to accumulate a fair amount of data, supportive data and evidence that the Sasquatch were in the area, and correlate it with video evidence as well. We were working really hard to get a good body of information collected on the animals in an area where there was reports to make a blueprint for other organizations and groups to be able to follow to collect data to kind of track down where they live, what they do, how they do it. It was kind of an attempt at making a Jane Goodall drop in to the area, become part of the area, and observe type of project. But it wasn't in the cards, unfortunately.
Right.
Funding was lacking. Apparently, after getting to where we were starting to put our roots down, and money wasn't coming down the pipe to get us off the ground and running. So, at approximately a month, close to a month, it was like 3.5 weeks. Yeah, it was 3.5 weeks or so. We disbanded mainly from the project, but I did manage to make contacts with a couple really good researchers in the field while I was out there. That I ended up doing some studies with in between in other areas of Washington. Kirk Brandenburg being one of them. I worked with Cindy Cadell, part of the project. You know her well. Ended up meeting a couple other really fantastic individuals through there, and ended up kind of joining another group and working in a couple of areas throughout Washington, from north to south, from the Olympics and on. And I made connections from there toward the Olympic project and other groups I work with. I ended up meeting Shelley. I believe it was at Beachfoot of the year before.
Yeah, Shelley Covington, Montana.
Yeah. And we scheduled to go out with her and Kirk in a couple areas, and I really spent a lot of time with them. They're great people, both of them. But Shelley is one of those people that's near and dear to my heart. She is a tough Texan. She won't let you tell her no. If she wants to do something, she's going to do it, and you ain't going to stop her. Kirk is just that ever-eager Bigfooter guy who doesn't have quit in him, and just always down for an adventure. Just like, you want to go do this? I'm like, yeah. And then we were off. We were doing it. And we were out therming together till 5 a.m. for like a week straight. It's great to have people like that. And between there, I mean, all over Oregon.
Yeah, Shelley Covington, Montana is awesome. I mean, amazing. She's part of the Olympic project, and so is Kirk Brandenburg. I mean, Kirk Brandenburg is just an amazing individual. Very, both Shelley and Kirk are very level-headed, very skeptical of what they may encounter and what's being shared out there. I mean, I love them to death. They're two of my favorite people in the world when it comes to researching this subject. And that's why I want to lead into what transpired in Washington. You were up in Washington with those two individuals and others, and I was very fortunate to catch the tail end of it. I made it up there late, but I did have. I did hear some stuff, and I did. My buddy Larry Turner and I did find an impression that was really good impression after the fact. Very compelling and very interesting, and it filed into and perpetuated, what you guys had experienced. So let's talk a little bit about that. You're up here in Oregon or Washington, excuse me. I live in Oregon, but we traveled up to the Mount Rainier area, and that's where you guys were camping and doing your research at, and you guys had quite the experience and a sighting, but it's so amazing to me because of how it was categorized or how it was taken down. I mean, Shelley really...
How it was documented.
How it was recorded, exactly. So, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I will. I'll explain that in detail. On our first day there, me, Shelley, and Kirk arrived into the area and rolled up in camp midday. It was kind of quiet. Not a whole lot going on. It was really dusty in the area, just really dry. So we were like just kind of getting settled in and setting up camp. Evening approach, we did a short therm walk and put out some audio recorders. Few distant what sounded like knocks coming off of a ridge, high ridge line, about I want to say half a mile to the east of our camp. Yeah, east of our camp. So we continued to kind of route this road down and around. And this area had a history, excellent history of reports and ongoing that ranged all the way back into the, I believe, 80s. Good recorded history. And we heard things moving around, and then we also had one of Shelley's friends, Cliff, there, another Cliff, what's his name? Cliff something. But yeah, he was
Cliff
up from
Griffin.
Texas.
Griffin.
Yes. Good guy.
Yeah, great guy.
And we were out night walking, and we heard a couple knocks coming down from the stream and field area that was to the south of camp. We were approximately about a third of a mile out in south, so to the east and south of the camp road walk, when we heard a very clear wood knot come out. We walked over there, we did a couple of sounds, we walked down a couple of paths quite loudly, breaking branches and stuff, just making noise. Out and around, cut back through, did a loop up on one of the trails and back to the road. And then we turned back and we went back to camp for the night. Not much else happened during that night except for some more knocking sounds from up on the ridge that echoed down and some coyotes. The next night, we heard wood knot coming. And I believe I have my time frame correctly. I may have this wrong that night, but they weren't anything fantastic. But they were pretty clearly, it sounded like wood on wood. It wasn't a limb dropping and hitting another piece of wood. It was a strike, something striking wood on wood, or percussion sound of similar magnitude. And they kind of repeated that. I think we had a friend of Kirk and mine named Bill up there, along with Scott. And we did a road walk again, the same kind of route, a little bit farther, about a mile and a half that night. What else? We sat around and just cooked on our stoves a lot. We laughed and talked in camp. Not much happened that night. And then we went out on the third night. We went out. I take that back. First on the second day, we did scouting. Then on the third night, the third day, we did day scouting around to find good bedding areas, and we found a lot of signs that bear were in the area. A lot, quite a bit. Scat tracks, torn up logs, old torn out bees nests, a bunch of stuff that showed that large omnivores were up there. The third night rolled in. Now I was sleeping in my car. I was on the northern side of camp. Kirk was on the southern side, and Cliff parked his truck down the slope about 20-ish yards down and around this little circle drive, where you and Larry parked the truck when you came up.
Yeah. Sorry, Larry. Yeah, Larry Turner.
Yeah, where you and Larry parked the truck the other time. That's where their truck was packed before. Drove up right there, and they put their tents or both of them put up tents kind of close to my car, right near the tailgate. I was in the car all closed up. I had it slit down just far enough that I could get my thermal out the crack of the window. I was running thermal DVR. Kirk was running thermal DVR all night, both of us. Kirk was pointed straight south down in the cedar thicket over his tent with his therm, and mine was pointed directly north. I was pretty certain that if anything was going to come in, it was coming in from the direction of the knocks from the previous nights. and then come around the swamp line and come in toward our tent area. That's why I had Kirk point his down the other direction to cover the opposite. Well, approximately on the third night, was 11? No, it was not. It was 9:40 something. We heard the first knock way off, and it was a clear, excellent, beautiful knock. It was just like that, the knock sound that you think of that you want to hear, just that clear wood knock. And we kind of got excited. And then about 20 minutes later, after our excitement was starting to ramp down a little bit, another one, but approximately another 120 to 130 yards closer, because they were off, but they were off enough, not so far you couldn't understand that they were knocks. And then it was closer, and it was slightly from the north, now more north, slightly more to the east, but only about 15 degrees off from straight north. About 20 more minutes later, right, like 280, 300 yards, maybe 320 yards from camp. It was a beautiful, just close range, loud, on the side of a tree. It was so close that it was like we all had the sound locked in our head that the next day we went out, we were looking at the trees to try to find where the animal had been striking the tree. It was that close we thought we could find the tree. Very clear now. And then we heard movement all of a sudden. About 15 minutes later, so approximately it's 11:40, 11:30. And there was movement all the way out of nowhere coming down around the backside of the swamp line, down the slope toward where their truck was parked, where your guys' truck was later parked, but down that slope another 60 yards or so, down toward the edge of that swamp line. You know where it wraps. Whatever it was following that. Well, it got approximately at where the nose of your truck would have been, but down the hill, and we could hear it just down there, breaking stuff, little taps, and a couple stomping sounds. But we kept hearing it move, and me and Shelly are sitting in the chairs, getting excited. But again, we were trying to maintain composure and take note of what time things were happening. I forgot to mention on the other night we had rocks thrown into our camp rocks and sticks thrown into our camp that bounced off the trees and bounced off my car. We have audio of all of that, and I believe Kirk has assembled a really nice little video documenting all of those sounds, which are just phenomenal.
Yes, yeah.
Very well, very clear. Like anybody who listens to that can tell that it's not just, an acorn falling. We actually found the rocks and one of the pieces of wood, which I believe was put into the write-up of the report.
Yes.
But yeah, and that was after you guys got there? No, right? I'm
So we showed up after the fact. I mean, we showed up just like okay. the day after all this transpired. And I did hear knocks and everything. I have some of those recorded, but we had missed the main event, which was pretty profound.
Well, anyways, it got down to approximately where the truck was at, down toward where the swamp starts to wrap into where the field clips out. It starts to open up and isn't quite as thick. Well, the sound got there. Nothing happened for approximately 45 minutes, so we started to think that our visitor had kind of taken off. And then out of nowhere, there was one bigger sound that got our attention. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was loud enough for us to take notion. I kind of turned our chairs just very slightly. Both of us were sitting. I was facing straight toward I was sitting under the awning, facing straight toward the east, and so was Shelly. But Shelly was on my right side. I was approximately 5 inches further forward than she was, and kind of having to look over my shoulder to talk to her, and my chair was slightly angled. But we were approximately within 10 degrees of view of the same exact area where the thing would later cross. Well, she was talking, and she just glances down the hill, and I'm talking to her. We're talking about something Bigfoot, of course. Well, while we're listening, and we're just trying to be normal and create voices in camp and be interesting. She says, "Do you see that down there? Something moving." I'm sure. I swear, I just saw something move. And I go to kind of rebuttal it, just like, oh, she's excited. She's going to see something she wants to see. And so I'm like, there are elk in the area. And no sooner do I get the word elk out my mouth, and I glance down, and we're both looking in the same direction at this point, slightly degrees from each other, like maybe 3 feet from each other, and see this absolutely massive silhouette, just this humongous silhouette that is, it looked like a ginormous NBA player just in a black suit walking down the slope of the hill away from us, and kind of was like turned just slightly away from us. Like we're looking down over our right shoulders, down towards it, and it looks like it's walking at a diagonal away and down from us. And we got the whole view was approximately 5 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds of this thing walking down the slope away from us. But it looked like it was at a walking, cadence, its leg and arm swing, but it looked like it was moving at a clip that we would have to run to achieve. Or at least jog down the hill to achieve. Sound, not a single sound. We just both kind of froze for about till the just thing got out of sight, and I jumped out of my chair, and I said, "Shelly, I saw it too. Shelly, you saw the same thing I saw. We both saw it." And we both just kind of like exploded with little bits of excitement about the fact that we just both saw this ginormous silhouette of upright, very clearly an upright, arms and legs, wide shoulders. This is it looked humongous. This would be by far the largest one I've ever gotten to look at. It was easily approaching 8 foot tall. Just judging on where we later found its hips were at, it had to have been close.
Yeah.
The shoulders were so wide. This thing was easily double and a half wide that I am. Easily. So you're talking something with shoulders approximately across, approaching what? Let me think. Close to 46 inches, almost 46 inches across at the shoulders. Just
yeah,
massive.
I've been down to that area, and you and Shelley described the same thing, which is fascinating, and we'll touch upon that here in a sec.
This is the cool part.
Yeah, huge.
Before we even started really, really heavily discussing the details of what we saw and where we saw it, we didn't walk over and point it out to each other. Shelley said, "Okay, let's stop what we're doing and not talk about it right now, but go get your tablet and paper and draw what you saw." So I just so happened, I said, "Okay, let's do this." She started working on what she was doing. I started working on what I was doing, and the next day I took a picture, turned it to black and white to symbolize how much moonlight we had, and I took my paint feature on my tablet and I sketched it in, what I saw. And she drew out on paper, looking at the actual spot, like up and down looking at it and drawing it, where she saw it. And then we sat in our chairs, and I handed her mine, and she handed me hers. And that's the moment both of us realized that we both saw the exact same animal from the exact same place with slightly different angles at slightly different times, but the same animal nonetheless going the same direction in that moment of the report. And they were identical in size comparison.
That was key.
What?
That was key.
But we didn't talk about, we didn't say...
No.
We didn't talk about the angle we saw it at or anything. We just drew what we saw and compared, and they were direct matches.
Right. It was amazing. It was amazing. And so Larry Turner and I showed up the following night, and we had basically got filled in on what had transpired, the audio. I listened to some audio and stuff, and I was just kind of blown away.
The photographing of the the photography of all the little objects that would landed in camp that were on top of pine
Oh,
needles
yeah.
and laying.
I
that
still
was something
have
that was very
one of
key.
those. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. We noted very clearly when we got into camp. First thing I do is I get out and scout my perimeter and find out what's in the area so I can recognize if anything unusual shows up. Because in my previous experiences, like at home, large boulders show up in the middle of paths and stuff like that when seemingly Bigfoot activity is taking place. So I just am in the habit of that. None of these objects that we later found were there until the next morning after the audio event of the throwing event, of all the throwing and knocking. So it was very key, and they were laying on top of pine needles, and some of the items looked like they had been sitting partially into the ground a little while, and then pulled up and then thrown and on top of the fresh pine needles. And we even found places where they had bounced off the car and landed right next to the tent. One of them hit near the tent. You can clearly hear one hitting my car, bouncing and hitting a tree, and then landing on the ground right next to Shelly's tent.
Right.
Waking Shelly up and freaking her out very clearly in the audio.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I was very fortunate with Larry Turner. Larry Turner and I showed up kind of late, and we were fortunate to listen to some of the audio that Kirk had recorded, that Shelly had recorded preliminary. I didn't listen to everything, just some of the key things. And what was really cool was that I got to see what you had drawn up and what Shelly had kind of drawn up, and shared. You guys had basically, after this this sighting out there, and kudos to Shelly Covington. She was like, no, I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to talk about it. Let's just draw what we saw, and it matched up perfectly. I mean, you saw. It was kind of, once again, reminds me of the Patterson Gimlin film, where you saw one clip of film, and she saw another clip of the film, but it matched
we were
up perfectly.
At slightly different angles, very slightly. I was approximately between 5 inches and a foot in front of her chair. Like the front of her chair, the back of my chair would have been 5 inches, between 5 inches and a foot in front of her, where her knees would be, and off to the left, and she was back of me. I'm having to look over my shoulder a little bit to talk to her. So she's looking back and over the side of the hill, and I'm kind of looking straight over the hill and watching this thing go down, where she saw it just clip over the top of the hill and start to go down. And we sat in each other's places and saw where the pictures were taken from and where the drawing was taken from. And we both had that realization at that moment that we just saw a super large dark-colored biped that just moments after wood knocks and other sounds walked down and away from our camp completely silently with no flashlight down a hill, from where I was at. You get down to the bottom there was fallen trees and swamp and holes that I fell into in that edge of that field down there. There's that mucky swamp sink spots. You fall right in, you're going to impale yourself on some of the rotten logs that have dead limbs sticking out. But this thing navigated perfectly silently with no issue, walked right through brambles, walked all the way down and around into the elk pasture and out with not a single light, nothing. Let alone we're in a place one, nobody knew we were going until last minute. We didn't put anything out to anybody. Nobody knew we were there. Nothing.
No, one of the things of note. One of the things of note is that this is an area where there's a history of Sasquatch activity, and some well-known people have filmed some stuff here. But I will say that when Larry Turner and I had arrived out there, I remember nothing really transpired or happened that night, but I got up really early that morning and I heard some crazy knocks going on, and Larry and I had decided to do a little hike about a quarter mile away from the camp, just to we were up early. I mean, we're talking like 6 in the morning. We're up early. We're hiking around, and Larry was about maybe 20 feet in front of me, and he said, "Hey, what the frick? There's this, I found something." So I walk up, and I'm looking at it going, holy smokes, that is a really good impression. I mean, it was in this really fine, like, suit, really fine, dusty
white filtered
foil.
Type. Yeah.
Oh, it was filtered. I mean, it was just really fine, but it was a perfect impression of a heel, and a foot, and toes. It was perfect.
What was the size of
there was almost no way. I'm sorry, what's that?
What was the size again? Was it approximately like 18 inches or 17 inches or something like that?
Yeah, it was around 16 and a half to 17 inches, but it was just so it was so perfect.
The outline was phenomenal.
Oh,
yeah,
it was phenomenal because it was fresh. Because I'll tell you what, if it weren't for the perfect lighting that morning, we would have walked right by it. But we had great lighting, and it just was there on this old logging road that was closed off, and the Larry had seen it, and I walk up and I'm looking at this thing, and I'm going, holy moly, man, that's a great impression. I mean, that's a foot. That's a foot, and you could see that it was the left foot, and the right foot would have led onto a bunch of pine needles and stuff. You never would have found another impression, but it was just the left foot, and it was so pristine that if it was really windy out there, it would have knocked us over. You never would have seen it.
The moment you would have had the heat of the sun on it and 5 mile an hour breeze, it would have been gone.
Oh, gone. I mean, it was just perfect. And so I was like, holy moly, this is one of the best, without a doubt, probably the best impression I've ever seen in person. And I was blown away. And what was really cool was the whole scenario. When we add up what you and Shelley had experienced and heard and seen, it really made sense. And I was like, holy smokes, wow. You guys did, in fact, see a Sasquatch that night, and we have an impression here. Now, to cast this impression would have been near impossible. And no,
it's too
I could
fine,
have tried to, way too fine. I could try to bring the hairspray out there and do my casting, whatnot, but it would have just, I mean, this powder was so fine. It was near impossible.
I will tell you,
pictures.
I did some practice. Yeah. Just as a note, I know people are worried about using the hairspray on a fine grade track like that in like the silty sifted sand or even the high, like almost talcum powder type consistency substrate, but you can in fact use it. You have to hold it much higher, another 8 inches higher than the 6 inches they recommend. And spray it straight forward and let it cascade down onto the track as a mist, and you're going to go through about a third of the can before you can make it, dense enough to support the weight of a casting. But it can be done.
Right.
I tried it in Oregon on my own footprint. But I understand what you mean. That really fine grade stuff is hard to work with to get good.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, Nathaniel, we're going to run out of time here, and thank God this is a pre-recorded show, so people can listen to it longer than on if it was live. But truly amazing stuff going on here, and I just, what's in your future? What are your plans down the road here, and where's research going? I mean, for you and for what you're looking at.
Well, 2017 is going to be a very big year for me. I'm going to be moving back to the Pacific Northwest area, particularly Washington, around Olympia area, it looks like, come late March to April. I and my wonderful girlfriend will be moving up then after she finishes school, and I'll probably be transferring with my current job. And lots and lots of plans, lots and lots of friends to catch up with.
Yes.
Again, me and you, we're going to have to be out a ton, like a load. Me and you are going to be out in the field like crazy. All over, and hopefully revisiting that exact place. I'm hoping to do a lot more work in that area in particular, at least one other area, at least 2 or 3 parts of Oregon, and up in the Olympics to do a little more work with the Olympic project specifically. And just basically to go back to what I call home.
Yeah.
I'm currently in Southern California and back on my legs again after a couple of catastrophes, but due to the support of some great people and some friends I have, I'm doing very well, and I cannot wait to be back. I have seriously missed all of you guys out that way. It's grated on me a little bit to be out this far away from what I call home and friends and family. I'll be back.
Well, you have a big fan base, a big support group, and big things are on the agenda. I mean, down the road here. I mean, I'm moving like you to Washington. I live in Oregon. I'm moving to Washington likewise, but it's where I'm being pulled to move to, and I want to continue on with the subject, and I take it so serious like you do, Nathaniel, and I know what it takes. I do know what it takes to get the subject the proper adherence and research on. I mean, it's a very important thing to me. I know it's important to you. So I'm looking forward to collaborating, being in the field with you down the road here. I think 2017 is going to be a fantastic year, and I think big things are on the agenda. I really do, and I'm excited. So, Nathaniel, I just want to thank you for sharing your experiences, your encounters, and your thoughts and insight. We'll have you back on the show soon because we only picked your brain a little bit.
Yeah, only a fraction of the things that we wanted to. I know. I'm sorry for rambling so long about some of my experiences and such. It's just that was the big thing that got me in. And hopefully next time we can go straight to the other discussions of some more of the data-specific aspects, like forest composition maps that I was working on, some long-term audio and thermal projects that I'm planning out and that I'd already touched upon in Washington. And hopefully we'll get to that next installment, I'm sure, like a part 2 or something. I don't know. Whatever you want.
Yeah, no, for sure. We will do a part 2 because we just basically touched upon who is Nathaniel York and what it was his experiences. We'll definitely need to have another show where we touch upon where that has progressed and your ideas into this field of research and what you're doing now. I mean, that's a whole another show, and it's going to be a fantastic show, and I'm looking forward to doing it. So we'll do it soon. We'll definitely do it soon. And I'm looking forward to having you out. And so we'll go from there. But hey, thank you for joining us, and have a great night.
Yeah, you too. All right, thanks for having me.
Hey, Monster Xers, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I'm very appreciative of all of those listeners out there, and I'm really thankful for. I get so many messages and emails and text messages and everything else from people that really enjoy Monster X Radio and what we're doing, and we try. I'm not saying we're the best out there, but I'm telling you, we do strive to bring you guys a great show. And hopefully down the road here we'll get more encounters. There's plenty of encounters out there. People are just not willing to share. I mean, really true encounters. You can get anybody on the show, any show, to discuss an encounter. And what we strive for here at Monster X is getting those encounters that we feel there's merit to it. So I know that's what a lot of people love to listen to, and that's actually what I love as well. But there's a lot of people out there doing great work, and it's an exciting time, too, because we are in a time where I think we're just around the corner from proving the existence of Sasquatch. That's just my personal opinion. I could be wrong, and I have no problem saying that. But people like Nathaniel, and Shelley Covington and everybody involved in, a limit project. And there's many groups out there that are doing really great research and bring stuff to the table that's, mind-boggling. But as a collaborative effort, I think it's important that we discuss these issues and bring those that I think that are doing important things in the field to the forefront. So I hope you feel the same way. Anyways, thank you all for joining us here on Monster X Radio. Until next time.
Finagling a ride? Well, if you take Uber, it doesn't. It's easy. Just install the Uber app. Enter your destination, confirm your location, and within minutes, a car will pick you up. Whether you're catching the red eye or taking off at the crack of dawn, you can request a ride 24/7. So avoid the hassle. Install the Uber app now and take your first ride today. Uber, the better way to get there.